All right, hi everyone. Welcome back to another Audio Issues Happy Hour. I'm your host, the founder of Audio Issues, and author of Step by Step Mixing, as always. And I'm here to help you confidently finish your mixes so you can be proud to release your records. Today we have a really special happy hour. I'm joined by Jordan Valeriote, and I'm a little out of breath because I had to run to the fridge and get a beer. Today I'm drinking Modern Times Orderville, which is a hazy mosaic IPA. Crack that open. The uncracking of the beer. And let me know in the comments and the chat what you're drinking, even if it's just water or tea. I'd love to hear what. But if you have craft beer that you recommend, do let me know because I will be. I'm excited to try all new beer. But without further ado, I'm going to get Jordan on here and we'll get this conversation going. Hey, Jordan, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And as always, to everyone and you, cheers.
Cheers.
For everyone who hasn't joined a happy hour live before, this is an informal Q&A session. Please submit any questions that you have, however weird, in the comments, and we'll try to get to them. However, we are mostly specializing in audio recording, editing, and mixing, and we'll be talking about that today. Jordan will be opening up his new his series. It's the first time I saw it was this spring, and if you want to check it out, go to audio-issues.com/FSP, and it stands for FullStack Producer. So let's get this game going by you telling us a little bit about yourself. And for those that don't know you, who are you?
Yeah, so my name's Jordan. I'm a producer, mixer engineer from Canada, near Toronto. Started making records almost 15, well, probably about 15 years ago, just with a small studio, really budget setup, tried to teach myself, and struggled for a bit, but eventually kind of broke through, and ended up producing, mixing, going full-time in 2008. So it's been over 10 years since I've been full-time in music. So spent a lot of time in the studio making records, bands like Silverstein, Intervals, Neck Deep, and some others. And then as of about 4 years ago, kind of started teaching others online and helping aspiring engineers make better sounding records, kind of focusing more in the rock umbrella. But yeah, that's what I've been focusing on for the past 4 or 5 years.
Very cool. And that is the Hardcore Music Studio brand, correct?
Yes, that's hardcoremusicstudio.com on YouTube. Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting when I watched the FullStack Producer series last spring was your emphasis on quality work. So what would you say to those that want to really start making an impact as a working professional in the music industry, making records? And this doesn't necessarily only limit yourself to, the production part. It's really just an ethos of being a professional.
Yeah, so I have kind of a framework that I call the gold standard mindset. And it basically means that any project that you put your hands on in the studio has to come out, and you can translate that to being in a band or musician too. But any music that you work on, any project you say yes to, you've got to do everything you can to get it up to that gold standard, which is kind of a competitive sounding mix, a competitive release that will, it's not going to stick out like a sore thumb when it comes on Spotify, right?
Right.
And so, that's, to me, that's the only way to actually break through and actually make a long-term career or a business in the music industry. Because, if you can imagine, let's say you got hired by a label and you got this great label project, they're sending you their new signing, but, the band struggles to stay on the click track, or the guitar player can't really play that well, or their instruments are not very good, they're not in good shape. What are you going to do? Like, are you just going to be like, well, band wasn't prepared, it's not my fault, I'm just going to press record and let it be? When you can't call the label up and be like, you know what, guys, sorry, it's your fault, the band you signed sucks, so the record sucks. You're never going to get hired again. So right. I think that, to really break through the industry, you got to have a big track record and a solid portfolio of really solid work, because that's how bands and labels trust you. If they go to your website and like 2 songs sound awesome and like the other 2 are kind of like sketchy and one's really bad, then that they're not going to feel that confident. So that's why I think it's so important to always be aiming for that gold standard.
Right. Yeah, it's not a good business strategy just to pass blame to somebody else, even if they are to blame, but ultimately if it shines negatively on you, there's no way to you're not going to succeed, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, if anyone watching, like, if you go and think about your favorite producers and mixers and look at their discography, like, there's nothing on there that doesn't sound top notch. They put everything they have into every project, no matter what. And I think that is really one of the things that kind of separates, people who kind of stay in the amateur arena to those who break through and kind of into the pro game.
Right. Yeah, so it's interesting to think about, like, the niche of some people want to be just mixing engineers or just mastering engineers, or some people want to edit audio. I don't know why, but and that sort of brings me to your term, the full stack producer. Although if you want to focus on or specialize maybe in something later down the line or whatnot, what does it mean to be a full stack producer? And also, what does that entail when it comes to the knowledge transfer between, editing, recording, mixing, mastering, and knowing all of the aspects of the music production profession in a way?
Yeah. So even looking at my own journey, like, I also wanted to, there's a certain point in my career where I wanted to focus just on mixing. I love mixing. I can totally relate to people who just want to focus on mixing. That was me. And I did get there eventually to where I was just doing mixing projects pretty much. But that was 7 years into my career after recording bands full time. That's how long it took to build up like the traction, the word of mouth, the skill as well, to the point where I was getting these mixed projects in, and that, I would get a request for a full record and I'd say, you know what, I'm not doing tracking. I'm just doing mixing. And then they would actually say, okay, we'll hire you for mixing. 7 years. So I think you can get there to the point where you're just specializing as a mixer, but it's really hard to just come out of nowhere and get people to hire you to mix. It's not impossible. It can happen, but it's hard to do that kind of at the top level. And, with Hardcore Music Studio, we've got over 2,000 customers in 50 countries around the world. And we've got a few dozen guys who have gone full time. Some people have gone full time this year, even amongst the pandemic and everything, which is awesome. But there's one common thing with, I think, all of our students who have gone full time in the studio. They're all full stack. They all do complete projects start to finish, tracking, editing, and mixing. I don't think there's any of our members who have gone full time who are just mixing, or at least that went full time starting that way. So I think it's just crucial to be able to record, to be able to edit, to mix, because that's where the bulk of the clients, pretty much wherever you are in the world, the bulk of the potential clients for you, artists who want to come record, they want the full thing. Like, they don't want to juggle a producer and an engineer and a mixer. Like,
Right.
They're just looking to come into a studio and leave with a finished song, right? So, I mean, that's one reason, just from like a business standpoint. And then the other reason is just for developing your skills. Like, if you're only working on mixing, you can get pretty good at mixing, but it might take you a lot longer than someone who's in the studio tracking and editing and mixing. I think that those skills kind of all play together. Of course, the better source tracks you have, the better mixes you're going to get. And that's another thing, is like, there's so many elements that spin off here. Like, if you're just trying to mix and you're starting out and that's all you're focusing on, chances are you're not going to be attracting the best quality clients right off the bat. None of us are. And so what are the chances that you're actually going to be getting sent really good source tracks? You're probably not, right? So that hinders the quality of your mixes. So it all plays together. But I think as you learn to track, as you learn to edit, that also makes your mixes sound better. It helps inform your mixes, and then vice versa. As you learn to mix better, helps you find better source tones and all that. So hopefully that wasn't too much stuff thrown at you.
No, it totally makes sense, because it's sort of, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of beginning with the end in mind.
Yeah.
And if you are doing everything like you begin with, like, I want this mix. I mean, you can even think of it as like, I want this mix to be easy. And if this mix is easy, that means that everything else has to be really, really well done, so that when it comes time to mix, when it comes time to the end in mind or whatnot, you have quality material there.
Yeah, you really should. I believe at the tracking stage, your kind of rough mix off the board at the end of the tracking stage should be like 80% like a finished record. It shouldn't be like the way a lot of people approach it today. The way I used to approach it when I started out, which was like you kind of rush through tracking because it's kind of annoying and whatever, you're kind of awkward telling people to do stuff again or whatever. So you kind of get through it and you're like, in your head the whole time, once the band leaves, I'll edit this, I'll make this sound better, I'll tune this, I'll sample replace the drums the whole time. And then they leave, and then you spend like days or weeks, afterwards trying to fix something that could have just been fixed in like 20 minutes or an hour at the tracking stage, right? And then you're kind of reinventing the entire production at mix time. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like the final 20% or 25% where you're just making it a little more exciting, a little more polished, make it punch, hit a little harder. But otherwise, it should just be, a continual evolution of the sound, right? Not like a complete like start over at mix time.
Yeah, you don't want to do like, oh, here's the original tracks and here's the like, you don't want to do an A/B comparison. I mean, that is impressive in and of itself, I guess. But if you're going from A to B and it's like completely night and day, you also just hear the amount of work and the amount of hours you probably put into the B of going from A to B.
And it's probably not going to be that fun. Mixing's going to stop being very fun if all you're doing is fixing stuff. Right. And you're also probably going to be getting, if you're working with clients, you're going to be getting a ton of revision notes, because all of a sudden they're in their studio hearing what things sound like. And then a week later you send them the mixes and you've completely changed everything. That's kind of hit or miss if that's going to go well or not.
Right. Yeah. Because if they're in the studio and you're getting you're getting the sounds with them in the room, and then they leave and then it's just completely night and day, like that's a kind of a, what would you call it? It's just kind of like a difference in perception that that comes out of nowhere for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask before we get into some of the questions here is, you were saying about the FullStack producers that you've trained and how they're going full time. So the quality of the work being one thing, and then the business side of things being another. Well, is there anything that you would recommend to keep in mind to sort of make that gold standard flow into the business side of things? What would you recommend that their mindset to be when they want to be full-time and they have the skills to be full-time, but maybe aren't being noticed or don't know how to get started with clients and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the gold standard mindset translating to the business side of things. I'll tell you a story. I did a survey of, let's say, I think it was between 20 and 25 bands a couple of years ago. And it was just asking questions about how did you choose your last studio and producer? What things frustrate you about the studio experience? Just kind of questions about how they go about choosing a studio and how much they pay and stuff like that. And it was pretty surprising, man. The number one complaint of bands by far in the survey was not quality. It was experience. It was things like the studio or the producer didn't deliver the final mix when he said he would. It was way overdue. We're still waiting for it. He showed up late every day. He didn't show interest in our music while we were in the studio. Poor communication, just a poor experience of people working with this person. That was the number one complaint. Like, quality of work was like, it was on there, but it was like way down here. Like it wasn't even close. Right. So that's one thing, is like, give people a good experience. Like, think of any other business. If you go into a store and they treat you like crap and don't take it seriously, and then say, yeah, we'll give it to you tomorrow, and a month later they still haven't given it to you, like, you're not going back there. So regardless of how good it is, right? So to really approach it like that too. And the other interesting thing about the survey too is, I think a lot of people in this business really undercharge for their work. And there's this perception that people are not willing to pay for recording and mixing. And I find that it's it's not true. I mean, we have members who have gone from $50 to $600 a song, like very quick.
Right.
We have people who, even just in other coaching programs, who, they were charging like $200 a song and they're struggling to like get good clients. And sometimes I just tell them, like, man, your work sounds great. Like, double your rate, go to 400 a song. And then all of a sudden it's like, no one says no. And it's like, oh, this is actually working out, because they're taking themselves more seriously. And also their clients are taking them more seriously, because they're actually putting the value out where they think it is, or what their work deserves.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting relationship between the price you charge and the value that you like put out in the world as you should be perceived at, in a way, and the type of client that you attract based on that signal of value. Because, and if you're working for $5 an hour, that you're going to get $5 an hour clients. But if you're working for $500, for a few hours of work, for mixing, for instance, or things like that, you're going to get a type of client that takes that sort of money seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just certain clients out there that, can you imagine if you got your website up, and let's say a band emails you, or a band comes across your website, and they're a pretty good band, they're touring, they've got some notoriety, they're looking for a new producer, but they hit your website and they see that your rate is $150 a song to record and mix. Like, they're going somewhere else. Like, it's just because it's certain clients at a certain level, you're only, there's a threshold, right? And they would think anyone at that price is not taking it as seriously as we are. So yeah, you're absolutely right that there's a psychology thing there. And of course, when you're starting out, I'm not saying you come out of the gate with your first client and you try to charge premium rates. Like, it's going to be hard. Like, you put in the work, it does take time, it takes reps, but make sure you don't keep your rates low too long, because that eventually could be the thing that is holding you back.
Right. And the math doesn't work out. It's never going to become a sustainable career.
Yeah.
Funny side promotion. This is actually one of the main topics of the book that I'm coming out with in a few months, is just this aspect of like getting clients and quality clients and making an impact in the industry. So
I'm excited for that.
Yeah. It's a go-giver style. So it's a story, not just me talking to the audience.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'll tell you all about it later.
Sure.
Let's talk a bit about genres. We have a question here from Ryan Stevenson. He said, "Hey guys, would love to know if the FullStack Producer courses are mainly focused for rock and metal producers, as it's labeled, or if it's something that can help producers of all genres." And that sort of is what I have here for genres as well. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the video series, no matter what genre you're producing, I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this. I will say the ones who are going to get the most value is going to be kind of under the rock umbrella. And I would include under that umbrella any genre where it's like drums, bass, guitars, vocals, just kind of a normal band arrangement. And that could be country, pop rock, metal, hardcore, radio rock, any of that stuff. But if you're recording real instruments, guitars, bass, drums, vocals, then definitely it is absolutely for you. But I have had people in kind of the hip hop world say that they take some of this stuff there.
Right.
But in terms of kind of the nitty gritty, it's definitely, I definitely didn't create it for those genres. So it's more definitely for the rock and pop world.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I've watched an interview with Michael Brower, and he sort of echoes how genres, you can also sometimes get pigeonholed in genres, and then you just become the country pop producer or the EDM producer, when you kind of want to branch over genres, because the skill set definitely does translate. Then you just have to sort of make those things sound like the genre they're supposed to sound like. But you can also bring in aspects of other genres and you kind of create something new. That's sort of what innovation is, taking two disparate ideas, putting them together to create something new, which is how the genre blending of popular music today is more or less like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it happens, like some of the bands that were more notable or became more notable that I worked with, they happened to be in that hardcore metal world. And, I certainly enjoyed working on that music. But I'm more of like, most of the time when I'm listening to music, I still listen to heavy stuff, but I'll listen to like just pop rock and like catchy stuff. And I love working on that kind of music too. And done a few of those records as well. But yeah, most of the stuff that came my way was the heavier genre for sure.
Right, right. Well, cool. We have just a thank you from Natalie Hamilton. Says thanks for doing this helpful info. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. And if you have a question, or anyone else watching have a question, please feel free to submit it in the chat on the right on YouTube. But if you're watching on Facebook, just post a comment there below. We got a question about nailing low end every time you mix. What's your low end management like? Isn't that the right term? Isn't that how we say it?
That's what people say, yeah. So I don't see anyone else talking about low end the way that I talk about low end.
Okay.
It's going to be very counterintuitive. You see these speakers behind me, NS10s.
Yeah.
These things have like almost nothing below 100 hertz.
Right.
And when I started mixing on these things, my mixes all of a sudden started translating. And all of a sudden, like, I started spending like almost no time on the low end in the mix, but it started sounding 10 times better. So it's really weird. But like when I had bigger speakers before, like they pumped out so much of that sub that just like hits your chest, and it's feels cool to listen to.
Right.
But I would end up spending so much time, like really surgically, like in that low set of frequencies from like, 40 to 100 hertz. And I'm trying to like sculpt the kick and get that punch right. And I'm trying to get the bass. I'm trying to get it to play together. And I'm spending so much time just focusing there. And I found that my mixes never translated. It was always like too muddy, too much low end, not enough. I never knew what it was going to sound like out of the studio. And my mixes didn't sound powerful out of the studio because I was kind of neglecting like the mid range and the low mids, which that's the bulk of the mix is like between like 100 and let's say like 10K.
Right.
Or even maybe lower than 10K. That's like, those are the frequencies that are going to be reproduced on every speaker. Like when you can start going below 100, there's earbuds, there's different speakers, there's car speakers that are just not going to like faithfully reproduce those. So anyways, if you want to have a big, powerful low end, yeah, it's cool to have some sub, but like you got to nail that area that's like in the 100 to like 500 range or 100 to 400 range, because that's like the power that translates everywhere. Right. So hopefully that's making sense. But yeah, I found that when I stopped obsessing over that sub low end, it's just everything got so much easier. I focus on just the mid range, which the NS10s help me do. That translates really well. And I spend about 5 minutes dialing in the low end of my mix. So I'll crank up like the 60 hertz on the kick. I have these headphones, Audio Technicas. There's no reason why. Oh, it's a mirror image here. There we go. These Audio Technica M50, I think. And there's, by the way, I don't think people have to go buy those. The only reason I use those is because those are the first headphones I bought in my studio like 15 years ago, and I still use them. But they have low end, and since they're headphones, it's not affected by the room, right? So I can kind of get pretty accurate low end in that sub range with the headphones. So at maybe 2 different points in my mix, I'll throw on the headphones and I'll like work on the low end of the kick. Is it too much? Is it enough compared to a reference track? Then I'll throw up the bass. Do I have enough sub? Do I not? I'll compare it to a reference track. Like, oh, it's really light on the sub. Boom, crank up like the 60 hertz on the bass track. Oh, there you go. There's that rumble. Yep, sounds good. Headphones off. So I know it sounds weird, but it's like, it's probably a total of 5 minutes that I'm worried about that sub range.
Interesting.
In my mixes at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I talk about this a lot when it comes to EQing in general, and you touched upon this because there's so much going on in that mid range, from the low mids to sort of the mids, whatever that range is called. Sure. It's never defined. And it has a lot to do with just sort of the harmonics. And if you're accenting a ton of the lows, that's going to multiply throughout your mix, and especially into the low mid. So that's why that you get muddy mixes, because maybe your low end is too much.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I've definitely had that problem before. And I think I hear this problem a lot too, is like when I listen to someone's mixes, especially on these NS10s, because again, they're not pumping out like the low end punch.
Right.
I'll get a mix for review or critique, and it just sounds like there's no low end at all. There's like this huge hole in those low mids from like 100 to 300, just nothing there. But there's a lot of brightness though. And this is a classic problem. I used to have this problem because a lot of people, if you mix in solo, you try to get rid of the muddy frequencies around 300, you dip everything out around 300,
Yeah.
and then you boost everything on the low end and the high end. So you end up with these mixes that have a ton of low end. I'll throw on my headphones and it will just be like, but then you take them off on small speakers and it sounds super thin. So yeah, I think just not focusing so much on that sub range is huge, and making sure you get the meat of the mix, that low mid range, and really the whole mid range, getting that right.
Right. Nice. All right. Next question here. We have a question about mastering. Do you think mastering without hardware is possible? I find if you want to get the loudness of CD, hardware is more easy and the sound quality is better. Well, let me add to the question: how much mastering do you do, and do you have hardware that you use regularly?
Yeah, so I do zero mastering. I discovered a long time ago that I just don't like it, and I always felt that I ruined my mixes when I tried to master. I don't know. I just couldn't get interested in building the skill set to like make stuff really loud without ruining it. I mean, I know there's more to good mastering than that, but
Sure.
essentially as a mixer, I'm doing my job to make it sound good mixing. And the mastering stage, my only concern is like, I've already done everything that I wanted to do to make it sound good. So at this point, I'm just trying to get it to commercial loudness. And I always ruin my mixes. So I started just looking for a good mastering engineer, and I found one, and I just sent it to him. But I would say, certainly, I would say it's possible to get good quality mastering without hardware. I don't see why not. I'm sure there's a ton of people out there who are doing that. I know that my mastering engineer, he uses a hybrid. He uses a bit of both. So I do think there's something to that. And I think a lot of the kind of top mastering engineers that I've talked to, they do use some analog gear. And I think when it comes to loudness, that analog saturation and even like an analog clipping and the harmonics, it kind of helps push up that loudness kind of bit by bit. I remember once my mastering engineer, his name is Troy Glessner, and I asked him like to break down his mastering chain once for one of my courses, and it was a lot of things in the chain, but everything was only doing like a tiny bit. Like, so he's gaining like a half dB of loudness here, another half here on this gear, and another half here. Like, and before you know it, it's like super loud, but it sounded really clean. So anyway, that's my approach.
Interesting. Yeah, it kind of makes me think about how important doing small, and when it comes to the mixing too, is doing small mix moves and how they sort of accumulate over time. And I don't necessarily mean like I know that we both share the whole it doesn't matter how much you boost or cut, the dB, like the absolute dB value does not matter. It's just how it sounds. But I mean, like you're putting a bunch of different things into the mix, and then the sum of their parts is somehow it just makes everything sound better. And that's probably even more true when it comes to mastering.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Got another question. My vocals sound more or less level probably, but they're missing that shiny quality that makes them stand out. When I try adding effects or turning up the vocals, it becomes overbearing. Any tips? I guess this is what's your vocal processing chain? Any vocal tips? I guess it's sort of an overall umbrella.
Yeah, so I think the biggest part of the vocal sound is the compressor. So I'm leaning on compression a ton, and it's not just level control is only like the beginning of what the compressor is doing. I love the 1176 models, especially the Waves one, the blue one, like the Chris Lord Algae version. Yeah. And it sounds amazing. Like you turn that thing on and I just crank it. Like you can see some of my videos on YouTube, but like usually like that gain reduction meter is just pinned. Like it's not even moving at all. But again, it's partially for level control, but like what that's doing is it's like bringing out all of the energy and the character in the vocal. And it's just like, when you do that with that compressor, to me, it just sounds like it's like dripping with energy. It makes the singer sound like they're pushing like twice as hard as they were, like they're twice as excited as they were. And to me, it's like that. I kind of learned that when I think I got some Fall Out Boy multi-tracks once, got my hands on them, and I had the solo vocal track, and I could just hear like on every word the compressor just clamping down so much. And I was like, wow, like that's the sound. And then I started listening to other like, you know, top 10, top 40 pop records, and like, you know, go listen to Kelly Clarkson song or something. Like the breaths are so loud, like, but like you can hear the compression, and it's just like that to me is like, I don't know, like when I throw that compressor, my vocal compressor chain on a mix, it's like I'm 80% to the vocal sound. And then I also like to EQ into the compressor. So, you know, it depends on the track. Like some vocals, they don't need that much brightness. Sometimes I'm cranking a ton of like 8 or 10K to get kind of that high end polish and sheen. But I think doing that into the compressor helps because it kind of levels off any spikes at that high end. So that's really like, those are the two key things, is like EQing some high end and some mid range into a lot of compression. Like I'm talking, if I tracked a vocal and mixed it, we're talking like 6 to 12 dB of compression on the way in when recording. And then I use the SSL channel as well when I mix for my EQ, but I'll also use a compressor on there, and I'll do like another 6 dB on that compressor. And then, you know, so we're at what, like 15, 18 dB. And then I'll do like 20 or 25 dB on the 1176. So it's just crazy. But then, then automation after that. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you're getting a lot of character from those two because, well, I don't know what you're using on the way in, but then the SSL is a VCA, and then you have an 1176, which is an FET, and you have these two characters, and it just like, as you say, like adds excitement to it. It's actually funny. We were talking about this because I do a weekly YouTube video, and the one that's coming out tomorrow is actually about how just stop looking at the gain reduction meter and just compress. And the technique is basically, I'm teaching like an 1176 into an LA2A sort of for peaks and then leveling. But the main thing is like, don't worry about the meters as much as you just worry about the excitement and what it does to the vocal and the sound in general.
Yeah, totally agree. It's kind of hard to do, but I mean, that's kind of a challenge of mixing digitally generally, is just that we use our eyes way too much.
Right. Yeah, I remember that's actually, I'd love to hear for you to tell the story of sort of, because you use the SSL channel for EQing, but how awful some of those EQ curves would look if you were to translate them over to visual EQs.
Yeah, right. So that was another turning point in my mixes when I started using the SSL channel plugin, because it's just got the knobs and the frequencies, and it doesn't show like, it's not like those, you know, the Fab filter or whatever. There's some really cool tools out there, but like, yeah, they show the graph and the curve and what's happening and all that. And I find when you're using that kind of EQ with the graph, it's like, man, you kind of play within the safe zone, because you I remember I trialed the Fab filter because someone was telling me how good it is, and it is really cool. I'm kind of stuck in my ways right now. I started playing with it, and I was like EQing some stuff, and the way the graph was scaled was like, just a 2 dB boost looked like this big on the screen, and I was like, how can I work like this? Because you do like 2 dB, but it's like, it looks huge, so you start freaking out, like, is this too much? This looks like a lot. I mean, if you would look at like my kick drum EQ on SSL channel, like sometimes it's literally like 8K, not maxed out to like plus 15 dB. And then like somewhere in the mid range, wherever the honkiness or moneyness is, it's like minus 15. And then the low end is like boosted way up. And so, you know, on a graph, the EQ curve would be like just like insane, right? And I don't think I would ever push it that far with those tools. But when you don't have that, and if you've ever had the experience of actually doing something on a console, it's just a totally different feel, because you're not looking at anything, you're just grabbing a knob. And on an SSL, like the knobs are like small on an SSL console.
Yeah, I'm always like, what is going on there?
Yeah, you gotta look so close, like, what am I doing? And they're so small that like you grab that thing and you turn it a little bit, like, oh, that sounds good. When you look down, it's like, oh my gosh, I just boosted like 9 dB. You know, so it's a lot different. I think everyone plays it. It's not, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people play it way too safe. I used to play way too safe in the box, just because of the way things looked. I get freaked out. Oh my gosh, there's a red light, but EQ curve looks crazy. That can't be right. I gotta pull it back. You know, stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's such good advice to basically, like, you want to take away what you don't like, no matter how much, and you want to add as much as you want until it sounds good. That's really what it is. Because if you watch, and then the frequency analyzers, like if you were to watch a kick drum EQ, like the frequency analysis inside of a visual EQ, like that curve looks weird. Like it's just all low end energy and then just a little bit of high end or mids and high end. So you definitely need to crank up sometimes that mid range in order to get that click to cut through in a mix, especially when it comes to sort of rock and harder genres.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah.
All right, let's see if there's any other questions here. Feel free to submit any questions in the chat or once here. Ben Simon had a follow-up. I've always been taught to watch the gain meter until your guys' advice. I think we both say the same thing.
Yeah.
FET or SSL compressor for drums? Any
Both can work, but I like the SSL compressor on my drum bus, and I also use it on my parallel compression bus. I'll occasionally use like 1176 on snare if I need a little more like just a little more like transient enhancer. Like I think with the slowest attack, it kind of does, it really makes it pop a little bit. So sometimes on snare, but generally I like the SSL compressor.
Yeah. David asks, because you're using NS10s, do you have any particular power amp preferences?
I just have a Yamaha, I think it's a P2500, Yamaha P2500. It's not like fancy or anything, but does the job.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about recording. We talked earlier about how we shouldn't compromise throughout the process, especially if you're doing everything yourself. What would you make sure, if you were advising a student, what would you make sure they always did, or what is like a key piece of recording advice that you would give in order to get a really good, easily mixable track, I guess?
And it's tough to choose, but I think I'd have to say just getting the performance tight. Like that's everything, especially in guitars, and obviously vocals, you want a great performance, but I think in rock, this genre, guitars is where I really hear it. Just like tuning, like I'm talking like tuning every 1 or 2 takes, checking the tuning on the guitar, being very picky about that, being very picky about performance, being able to solve problems that come up. You know, if guitar player's playing a lead line or even a rhythm line, and when he's like, you know, for example, let's say I'm doing like a rock record and we're tracking the chorus and it's just a chord progression. We're just playing the chorus down here, and then one of the chords is like higher up on the neck, but like the tuning sounds a little wonky there, but it sounds fine down here. So it's like, well, what do? It's like, okay, well, we're playing this part and then we stop, and then I'm getting that player to hold the chord on the neck, and I'm tuning to the tuner every note in that chord, and we're punching that in so that sounds good, and then we're tuning again, we're moving on, right? So that's just one example of like, if there's a problem, like don't let there be a problem, like solve the problem, and split it up, like be creative. And I teach in my courses all the different ways you can kind of get around these common issues. But that's the number one thing. Like, again, go to your favorite records, listen to them. Like, you don't hear out-of-tune guitars. You don't hear like mistakes in playing unless you're listening to stuff that's like 40 years old. Yeah. But you know, there's no mistakes. Like it's done right. And it doesn't matter how many layers you add or how many cool mics you use. You know, if your performances are not tight and in tune, it's not going to sound good. It's going to be hard to mix. And so many times I get mixes for review, and people want my feedback on how they can improve their mix. And it's like, your mix is pretty good, but it's like, if the guitars were just tight, like it would sound 10 times better, you know, or if it was in tune. So the performance is probably, I'd say that's number one. And there's definitely other parts of tracking that I could discuss, but that'd be my number one area to focus.
Yeah, I remember one thing. It was a video a while ago from you, and it sort of goes into, well, it kind of like you were saying, you punched in that one chord in tune or whatever. But thinking about recording in a non-linear fashion, for instance, if you have a palm muted part that's, you know, like a digga 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 digga, and then there's like some lines up on the neck, and maybe it's not hard for that guitar player to play that part live, but it makes it so much cleaner when they're done separately.
Yeah, for sure. I think I want to put a disclaimer too, is like what I really don't want people to do is just go to off the extreme deep end and just be like, well, I'm going to record all the guitars half speed and then edit it together and make it absolutely perfect. Like, you can overdo this too. The goal is to solve problems. So if there's not a problem, then don't try and solve it. If the guy can play and it sounds awesome, then leave it.
Yeah.
But yeah, even great players sometimes, like, they can play it and it sounds good, but when you get in the studio and it's under the microscope, it's like, yeah, maybe you do want to split it up, because that string noise that when he slides his hand up is just like, it's just kind of nasty. Let's not have that. So yeah, there's tons of little things like that, but all those little details, they really add up.
Totally. Yeah. Speaking of guitars in mixing sense, the last time we talked, you recommended the CLA 3A, and now it's just permanently on my guitar bus. So,
man, it's so good, eh?
No. Yeah, it's just both on the guitar and the bass, and it's, I love compressors that are just so simple that you can't do anything with them other than just put them on and tweak one or two knobs.
Yeah.
And then it just sounds better, and then you can move on, and you don't have to care about the nitty-gritty details of what the DSP is doing.
Yeah, I love that too. I was tracking at a studio a few years ago, and they had a 3A there, and it was like, oh man, I'm gonna compare this like back to back real quick. So I got like my rhythm guitar up with my settings there, and then I put it through the hardware as well, and it was very close. I had to get a different amount of gain reduction to get the same sound, but like the plugin sounded like just as good. So that was cool.
Yeah, no, it's such a good compressor. Moving on from recording into what I would think gets some flack for being boring, which is the editing part. But obviously, is it necessary for great mixes?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, next question.
Yeah, I think any record that comes out that's commercial, I mean, chances are it's going to have edited drums that are basically locked to the grid. Now, and it's going to have tuned vocals to some extent, either a lot of tuning or a little bit, but it's going to have something, even great singers. So yeah, I'd say those two things especially. Now, I don't really do much editing on basic guitars after the fact. To me, that's all what I talked about in the tracking stage. It sounds way better to get that in tracking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, editing the drums and tuning and timing for vocals is crucial. I would say when someone showed me how to quantize the drums in Pro Tools, like back in 2007 or something, it was this massive light bulb moment, because as soon as he finished editing it for me and played it back, I was like, nothing about the drum sound changed at all. He didn't mix the drums differently at all. He just put them on the grid. And as soon as he played it back, I was like, oh, that's the sound I hear on records that I listen to. Like, that's it. That's, I think we always have these little light bulb moments throughout learning this, learning how to make records. But that was one of them. But yeah, it is boring. I give you that. I don't think anyone is like, well, maybe there's a few weirdos who are excited to edit drums, but right. I'm not one of them.
Yeah. No, but it's just such a crucial aspect. In my step-by-step mixing book, I sort of I compare it to doing the dishes before you cook dinner. So you can't, like, it's annoying and messy to make and have to be able to have fun in the kitchen and cook dinner if your kitchen is a disaster and there's dirty dishes in the sink and everything is a mess.
Yeah.
And that analogy, I think I wrote that like 7 years ago, and I still come back to that one.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any more questions here. Feel free, if you're just chiming in, to submit any questions you have for us in the chat or as a comment. It seems like you have the NS10s are getting a lot of love here. Ryan is asking, have you guys any experience with the Martin HS7s or HS5s? Any of those you would possibly recommend for someone wanting to go in that direction? So I can actually answer this one. I have HS5s, so not 7s. Yeah, they're 5s, right? Were they? Yeah. Well, the smallest kind, but they're sort of my secondary monitors. I have the Focals that do have a sub, but I check everything on the Yamahas. But then I also have a mix cube, sort of this one driver mix cube that I check everything on. And going back to your comments on the mid range and things like that, because that's where all the energy is. If the mix sounds good on the mix cube, it's definitely going to sound much better everywhere else, because the mix cube sounds terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's key to have speakers like that. You can't only listen to like the really nice fancy studio speakers. You got to have something that's real world.
Yeah, for sure. What's your do you have a translation process in general? Like, what do you check your mixes on?
Honestly, just the NS10s, like I said, and I'll check the low end on headphones and compare against reference tracks. But in terms of translation, that's the main thing. Except for when it's done, I'll listen in my car like everyone, and these days I'll also actually listen on my Apple earbuds, like the AirPods, just because at this point I've listened to a lot of music on those now, and so I kind of, just like your car, like I kind of know what those sound like too. So I find that like sometimes I'll put it on those, and it's usually like the high end. Sometimes it'll be harsh. Like that's the thing that will jump out on those, because they're little earbuds, right? So, that's kind of what I'm checking there. And then in terms of low end translation and can I hear the vocal and stuff, I'm usually checking that in the car. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, the earbuds are crucial for me. I always take the dog for a walk and listen to the mix on a pair of earbuds, and that's super helpful. You can also hear a lot of like weirdly enough, like the muddy and the boominess coming from the sort of repeating and duplicating into the mid range from the low end.
Sure. Yeah.
Another question here: when working with 3 reverb buses, a short, medium, and long reverb bus, how would you set your pre-delay, decay, or reverb time? And I will add to the question, what is your general approach to reverb / delays in general?
Yeah, so I don't use a ton of reverb in my mixes. Pretty much just on my snare drum, honestly. There's a lot of mixes where the only reverb you'll see is on the snare. And I'll have like a short gated snare and a long plate snare reverb. But I do have a few, like he's asking here, I do have a few reverb set up in my mixing template. I do have like a room reverb, I have a short plate and a long plate. And then I have just like an extra reverb that maybe a wonky one that I want to add in the mix. Right. So yeah, like a pre-delay for like drums, which is where I'm mostly using reverb, somewhere between 10 and 30 milliseconds of pre-delay. And I don't really have a hard and fast rule. I kind of just like listen to the drum and start with the reverb, and I start just creeping up the pre-delay. And for some reason, there's always like, it's different mix to mix, but there's always like a certain range with that pre-delay where it kind of just like lets that transient come through.
Yeah, it clears up.
Yeah. So yeah, between 15 and 25, 30 milliseconds on drums usually. I'll probably on vocals too, if I were to use it, let's say on a stripped back like acoustic vocal track, that's kind of where I would use reverb, like a short reverb on the guitar and vocal. And yeah, I'd probably do a similar thing like in that same range of pre-delay. But yeah, I really tend to favor delays over reverb for adding space in a mix. So on vocals and guitars, it's like I use a lot of delay, and it's pretty rare that I'll use reverb. If I'm using reverb, it's because I really want it to be obvious in the mix. It's like I want it to be an obvious effect. Like I want it to sound like a really huge thing or whatever. So
gotcha.
But
yeah, it's very similar for me, especially well, it also obviously depends, because all of those time-based effects, they always do depend on the time of the song, the BPM of the song. So the pre-delay, the pre-delay and the reverb time and all that decay stuff, it's always dependent on, what's the style of song, what's the, for a vocal, is the vocal a slow vocal with a lot of sustained notes, or is it super staccato? That's going to affect what kind of reverb or delay you're going to use. And then across genres, it's very different, because you don't want a bunch of reverb on a rap vocal, and you might want a huge hall reverb on a lush ballad,
Sure. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For sure. Noella Nix says that HS7s cause major ear and head fatigue. So not a fan, but that's to each their own.
I can say too that when I was telling the story about the difference between my old speakers and these ones, the old ones that I had were HS8s, and I liked them to track on because I could turn them loud and they have good low end and they sound good. But yeah, I definitely had translation issues with them because there was so much low end to them for all the reasons I talked about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because they have a port in the back, I believe. Right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. There's Mike Senior's book, The Mixing for the Small Studio. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mike Senior, but
I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't read it though.
He has a whole thing about how ported speakers can really negatively affect your translation because they're creating artificial low end in that sort of way.
Yeah.
One thing about the reverb, actually, that now that I remember it from your mixing, from your hardcore mixing course, is the creating an artificial room mic or room sound. It might be a little bit hard to explain without showing it, but can you elaborate a little bit about that technique? That was one of the videos that I was like, oh, a completely aha moment for me. It's like, 'cause it's so useful when you get things that you want to add more depth to in a way.
Yeah. So I think, room tracks are so essential for drums to just kind of like just glue it all together and make it sound alive. And a lot of times, like, sometimes I get sent program drums to mix and they didn't give me a bounce of the room track, or the room track just sounds horrible. Right. Or likewise, even if it's live drums, sometimes a lot of drums are recorded in really small rooms now, and they might have a room track, but it just doesn't sound like a room. It's just like a mic that's 5 feet away from the kit, and it's got no ambience at all. So that doesn't really help. So
just cymbals.
Yeah. So exactly. So in those cases, I kind of started creating called a fake room track. And basically what I do is create a new aux input, and I send all the individual drum tracks to that, and I'll create like a special mix for that. So if I want to have like less cymbals in that track and more kick and snare, which you probably would, you'd send that to. So you have like this separate drum mix going to this aux track. Then insert a reverb plugin on there and choose a setting that is like supposed to mimic like a real room. So it's not going to be like usually not a crazy long plate or something, but something under the room category, in whatever whatever verb plugin you're using. Kind of play around with a few till you find one that kind of sounds like a relatively realistic drum room sound. Yeah. And then have that as your room sound, like the artificial reverb that you fed the whole kit in, and then treat that result, like what's coming out of the reverb, like you would a normal drum room track. So hit it with the compressor, do some EQ, maybe even distort it if you want it to sound really aggressive. Right. Kind of mess it up the way you would like a normal room track. And I find that it's saved the day for me a bunch of times. It sounds like it has for you too.
Yeah, no, it definitely it adds depth without space in a way. Yeah. And actually going back to your hardcore recording, because which you also show you show the recording part of it, of like you put, I think it was an XY in like a closet in the like by the drums, and just adding that in makes the drums so much bigger without adding unwanted space. And if you are doing the entire process yourself, that's a super great thing to do. Add a room mic or put a room mic. I have a small studio here, and sometimes I've recorded drums just behind me, and there's a door here, and I'll put a mic there, and it'll add this depth that is very hard to recreate, and is weird, but underneath fills things up very nicely.
Yeah, anyone in a small room where you can't get any drum ambience at all, do that. Find a weird spot, put it behind a door, like you said. That's what I used to do as well. If you got a closet somewhere, you put it down the hall. Yeah, done that in other studios too, where the room
down the hall technique for sure.
Yeah, I remember doing one where it was like it was a big room we were recording in, but the room tracks just sounded so dry, like there's nothing. So yeah, the engineer suggested like maybe we should put it out. They had this big glass hallway. It's like maybe we should put it at the end of the hallway and open the door. And so the mics were literally like 60 feet away from the kit. So the delay was huge on them, but we just nudged it back and it sounded awesome. So
Nice.
yeah, sometimes you gotta get creative with it.
For sure. Well, cool. We have maybe time for a couple more questions, so feel free to submit those if you have something in mind that you want us to answer. But while we wait for that, or to conclude, I want to ask you a very, very simple question, and it's just, is mixing hard?
Mixing is hard. That's why you and I have businesses doing this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite the process, but like going back to sort of having a good, especially if you're doing everything yourself, having a gold standard for the entire process, making sure that you're doing quality work at every step of the process, means that mixing is maybe a little less hard, even though some those plugins and processors and routing and signal flow and gain staging and all of those fun buzzwords, well, they're not really buzzwords, they're real terms. Yeah, so it makes the process a lot easier, but you still need to know how to put all that stuff together.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. It's a skill you have to learn. You have to practice. You got to put in the hours. But you know, at the same time, you don't necessarily have to struggle and figure it out all on your own like I did. It takes a long time. So that's why you know, this is why stuff like this is great, where people can learn from you and they can learn from me, and you know, hopefully really speed up. You know, I can tell you all the things I did wrong that were screwing up my mixes, and I can just tell you the answer that fixed it. And it took me 3 years to figure it out, but I can give it to you in 5 minutes, right? So I think that's kind of the beauty of what we have now.
Right. Yeah. So it goes back to sort of thinking about, you know, having a workflow, but also a workflow will differ amongst, you know, 5 different people will maybe have a different workflow. But I think that workflow evolves over time, based on your experience and based on how, also based on where you learned it from. So maybe you learned it from, you know, me, and then that will evolve over time. And then maybe there's a different workflow from you, even though we kind of teach it very similarly. And then it evolves over time. In my case, I watch a lot of videos, and you always pick up a little, you know, tidbits here and there that go into your mix template or go into your workflow in your head, and it just, you know, adds to your experience. And it makes it so that when you're faced with a problem in the mixing stage, you can actually, you know, you maybe have a light bulb moment of like, oh, well, no, let's just create a drum room track here and do this, or no, let's just see if an LA3A will work on it or whatnot, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, gotta have a big bag of tricks ready to pull out.
Right. But yeah, but at the same time, it's like you can't just start with a bag of tricks. There needs to be an overall idea, an overall workflow, or a process.
Yeah. You gotta know why you're doing it.
Right. One Clay asks, you mix heavy music, why aren't you supposed to have long hair? Did you ever have long hair?
Man, I tried multiple times. I don't know, for some reason I'd get my hair down to like here in that like awkward stage.
Yeah.
And then I just like, man, this is horrible. The last time I tried, it was like my wife at the time had like a short haircut that was like down to here, and like I was growing my hair out, and like when my hair got like as long as hers, she was like, you have to cut your
hair. Yeah. I when I was a teenager, I was in a metal band, or an alternative prog metal band, whatever you want to call it, sort of a Tool, a Perfect Circle style band, and it came complete with the long hair and even red highlights, because I was so into the cover of Marilyn Manson's Mechanical Animals, so I wanted right to that red hair.
I can see it, man. I think you should bring it back.
Oh, I don't know. I think that's just gonna stay in Iceland with my ESP guitars and leather pants. One last question here before we leave, from Daniel, is if you're EQing on the master bus, what part of the frequency spectrum do you find yourself spending most of the time, if any at all?
Yeah, I very rarely. Maybe on 5% of my mixes, I'll have an EQ on the mix bus, but pretty much not. If it is, it would just be like a tiny bit of like low end and high end.
Yeah. For me, I usually do a pull tech, and it's either 60 or 100 and just a little bit of a boost, and then a 10K on the pull tech. And then if I, as a last resort, I'll EQ the low mids if I can't figure out how to make it less muddy on the individual tracks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thanks so much for answering all of our questions. And is there anything you want any parting words?
No, I mean, this is fun. I hope everyone hits your link there and jumps into the FullStack Producer series, kind of goes deeper into a lot of this stuff. And yeah, I'm excited to see everyone there.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so both, you see the URL here, audio-issues.com/FSP, but there's also in the description, there's a link there as well to sign up for the FullStack Producer series, which goes over a lot of the stuff that we talked about, the gold standard, and how to sort of get to the level of professionalism that you want to make an impact with your career. Cool. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everyone. And as always, use your ears.
Thanks, man.